Who was Caleb in the Bible? Discover the inspiring story of Caleb. In today's video, we'll dive deep into Caleb's story, exploring his origins, his incredible journey of faith, and the impact of his actions on future generations. You'll discover how his trust in God transformed not only his life, but an entire nation. Most importantly, you'll learn how his choices still teach us to live with purpose, courage, and determination. Before we get started, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give this video a like. Your support helps us share this powerful message with more people. Why not share this video with someone who needs inspiration to face their own challenges? Stay with us until the end and uncover the practical lessons that can transform your own faith journey. Who was Caleb? There were many heroes in the Bible, but few exemplified unshakable faith, courage in the face of adversity, and perseverance in waiting for promises like Caleb. Who was this man whose life still inspires generations? Today, we will dive deeply into Caleb's story, discovering valuable lessons that challenge us to fully trust God and face life's giants with courage. Caleb is introduced in the Bible at a pivotal moment in Israel's history. The people had been freed from slavery in Egypt through the miracles performed by God under Moses' leadership. They were on their way to the Promised Land, but the journey was not easy. Upon nearing the land of Canaan, God commanded Moses to send 12 spies, one from each tribe, to explore the territory. Caleb, representing the tribe of Judah, was one of these spies. This mission was not just to observe the land, it was a test of faith, courage, and obedience. When the spies returned, 10 of them gave a pessimistic report. They described the land as fertile, yes, but said its inhabitants were giants and their cities, fortified and impossible to conquer. Only 2 men, Caleb and Joshua, challenged this negative perspective. Caleb raised his voice in the midst of fear and declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Numbers chapter 13, verse 30. Here is the first great lesson we learn from Caleb. He did not allow fear to dominate his vision. While the other spies focused on the obstacles, Caleb trusted in God's promises. He knew that if God had promised the land, he would be faithful to deliver it to the people of Israel. This trust is a direct reflection of his relationship with God, something that should inspire us to look at challenges through the eyes of faith. But who was Caleb before this moment of prominence? Although the scriptures do not detail his childhood or youth, we know that he was from the tribe of Judah, one of the most prominent among the tribes of Israel. He likely grew up hearing about God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and this formed the foundation of his unshakable faith. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, facing uncertainties and hardships during their journey, Caleb stood out as someone who fully trusted in God's guidance. An interesting point about Caleb is that he was described as having a different spirit. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 24, God declares, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." This distinction speaks to his unique character, his willingness to follow God even when the majority did not. This different spirit was a combination of faith, obedience, and courage that set him apart from his contemporaries. Caleb's attitude challenges us to reflect. How do we respond when we face obstacles? Many times we are like the 10 spies, allowing fear and circumstances to obscure God's promises. Caleb teaches us that true courage comes from believing that God is greater than any challenge we may face. Another important aspect of Caleb's life is his ability to inspire others. When he and Joshua stood against the negative report of the other spies, they were not just defending their own perspective, they were trying to encourage all the people of Israel to trust in God. Unfortunately, fear prevailed, and the people refused to enter the Promised Land. Because of this, God decreed that the entire generation, except for Caleb and Joshua, would die in the wilderness, and only their descendants would enter Canaan. This divine decision highlights the importance of collective faith. The lack of faith within a community can delay God's promises, but individual faith, like Caleb's, never goes unnoticed. God honored his obedience and ensured that he would inherit the land he had explored. However, Caleb's story does not end in the wilderness. His journey teaches us about the importance of perseverance. During the 40 years the people wandered in the wilderness, Caleb kept his faith intact. He did not allow circumstances or time to diminish his trust in God. Instead, he continued to believe that at the right time, the promise would be fulfilled. Who was Caleb? Introduction to a life of faith and courage. There were many heroes in the Bible, but few exemplified unshakable faith, courage in the face of adversity, and perseverance in waiting for promises like Caleb. Who was this man whose life still inspires generations? Today, we will dive deeply into Caleb's story, discovering valuable lessons that challenge us to fully trust God and face life's giants with courage. Caleb is introduced in the Bible at a pivotal moment in Israel's history. The people had been freed from slavery in Egypt through the miracles performed by God under Moses' leadership. They were on their way to the promised land, but the journey was not easy. Upon nearing the land of Canaan, God commanded Moses to send 12 spies, one from each tribe, to explore the territory. Caleb, representing the tribe of Judah, was one of these spies. This mission was not just to observe the land, it was a test of faith, courage, and obedience. When the spies returned, 10 of them gave a pessimistic report. They described the land as fertile, yes, but said its inhabitants were giants and their cities, fortified and impossible to conquer. Only 2 men, Caleb and Joshua, challenged this negative perspective. Caleb raised his voice in the midst of fear and declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Numbers chapter 13, verse 30. Here is the first great lesson we learn from Caleb. He did not allow fear to dominate his vision. While the other spies focused on the obstacles, Caleb trusted in God's promises. He knew that if God had promised the land, he would be faithful to deliver it to the people of Israel. This trust is a direct reflection of his relationship with God, something that should inspire us to look at challenges through the eyes of faith. But who was Caleb before this moment of prominence? Although the scriptures do not detail his childhood or youth, we know that he was from the tribe of Judah, one of the most prominent among the tribes of Israel. He likely grew up hearing about God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and this formed the foundation of his unshakable faith. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, facing uncertainties and hardships during their journey, Caleb stood out as someone who fully trusted in God's guidance. An interesting point about Caleb is that he was described as having a different spirit. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 24, God declares, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." This distinction speaks to his unique character, his willingness to follow God even when the majority did not. This different spirit was a combination of faith, obedience, and courage that set him apart from his contemporaries. Caleb's attitude challenges us to reflect, how do we respond when we face obstacles? Many times we are like the 10 spies, allowing fear and circumstances to obscure God's promises. Caleb teaches us that true courage comes from believing that God is greater than any challenge we may face. Another important aspect of Caleb's life is his ability to inspire others. When he and Joshua stood against the negative report of the other spies, they were not just defending their own perspective, they were trying to encourage all the people of Israel to trust in God. Unfortunately, fear prevailed, and the people refused to enter the promised land. Because of this, God decreed that the entire generation, except for Caleb and Joshua, would die in the wilderness, and only their descendants would enter Canaan. This divine decision highlights the importance of collective faith. The lack of faith within a community can delay God's promises, but individual faith, like Caleb's, never goes unnoticed. God honored his obedience and ensured that he would inherit the land he had explored. However, Caleb's story does not end in the wilderness. His journey teaches us about the importance of perseverance. During the 40 years the people wandered in the wilderness, Caleb kept his faith intact. He did not allow circumstances or time to diminish his trust in God. Instead, he continued to believe that, at the right time, the promise would be fulfilled. Caleb's role among the 12 spies, a test of faith and leadership. Caleb's story reaches a crucial turning point during the mission of the 12 spies, a defining moment not only for him, but for the entire nation of Israel. This mission, recorded in Numbers chapters 13 and 14, was more than a simple reconnaissance operation. It was a divine test of trust, courage, and obedience to God's promises. As one of the 12 spies, Caleb stood out not just for his actions, but for the faith that guided him through adversity. The mission began when God instructed Moses to send 12 leaders, one from each tribe of Israel, to explore the land of Canaan. This was the land God had promised to Abraham and his descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. Caleb, representing the tribe of Judah, was among the chosen. For 40 days, the 12 men scouted the land, observing its fertility, its inhabitants, and its cities. What they saw would challenge their faith and their confidence in God. When the spies returned, they brought evidence of the land's abundance. They carried a cluster of grapes so large that it took 2 men to carry it, along with pomegranates and figs. They confirmed that the land was indeed fertile, just as God had promised. However, 10 of the spies focused on the challenges they observed: the fortified cities, the large and powerful inhabitants, and the perceived impossibility of conquest. They said, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. Their fear spread quickly among the people, inciting panic and despair. Caleb, however, refused to be swayed by fear. Standing alongside Joshua, he silenced the crowd and declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Numbers chapter 13, verse 30. This statement was not born of arrogance but of deep faith in God's promises. Caleb understood that the strength of the opposition was irrelevant compared to the power of the God who had delivered them from Egypt and sustained them in the wilderness. This moment highlights one of Caleb's most remarkable traits: his unwavering confidence in God. While the 10 spies saw obstacles, Caleb saw opportunities for God to demonstrate his power and faithfulness. His perspective was rooted in the belief that God's promises were not dependent on human ability, but on divine sovereignty. Caleb's response challenges us to ask ourselves, how often do we allow fear to dictate our decisions instead of trusting in God's promises? The reaction of the Israelites to the spies' report was devastating. Fear overtook the camp, and the people wept through the night. They even began to question their journey, saying, "If only we had died in Egypt, or in this wilderness." Numbers chapter 14, verse 2. Some even proposed appointing a new leader to take them back to Egypt. In the face of this rebellion, Caleb and Joshua tore their clothes in grief and urged the people not to rebel against God. Caleb passionately reminded them, "The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." Numbers chapter 14, verse 9. Caleb's faith was not just theoretical, it was active and bold. He stood firm in the truth, even when it meant going against the majority. This boldness is a hallmark of true leadership and faith. Caleb demonstrated that faith in God often requires standing alone, challenging popular opinion, and holding fast to what is right, regardless of the consequences. God's response to the rebellion was swift and severe. He declared that the entire generation of Israelites who had doubted his promise would die in the wilderness, never entering the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua were spared from this judgment, as they had remained faithful. God specifically honored Caleb, saying, "Because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." Numbers chapter 14, verse 24. This different spirit mentioned by God is a key insight into Caleb's character. It was a spirit of faith, courage, and total reliance on God. Caleb's example teaches us that faith is not passive. It requires action, conviction, and the willingness to stand firm even in the face of opposition. The 40-day mission of the 12 spies serves as a microcosm of the spiritual challenges we face today. Like the Israelites, we often encounter situations where the obstacles seem insurmountable and fear threatens to overshadow our faith. Caleb's response reminds us that God's promises are trustworthy, regardless of the circumstances. His story challenges us to evaluate our own perspectives. Do we focus on the size of the giants, or do we trust in the greatness of our God? Caleb's leadership during this critical moment set the stage for his future role as a conqueror and inheritor of God's promises. His faithfulness during the mission of the spies was not a fleeting act, but a consistent reflection of his deep relationship with God. This consistency would define Caleb's life and legacy, influencing generations to come. Caleb's perseverance, waiting on God's promise. Perseverance is one of the most remarkable qualities in Caleb's life. His ability to maintain unwavering faith over an extraordinarily long period sets him apart as an example of unshakable trust in God. While many would have given up or lost hope, Caleb remained steadfast in his belief in God's promise, demonstrating that faithfulness to God requires patience and determination. After the rebellion of the Israelites against God, as recorded in Numbers chapters 13 and 14, the nation received a severe sentence to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. During this time, the entire generation that had rejected God's promise would die without entering the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua, who had shown faith in God, were spared from this judgment. This divine decision meant that Caleb had to wait 40 years to see the fulfillment of God's promise. Even so, he never lost hope. It is remarkable to imagine Caleb, at 40 years old, full of energy and confidence, being forced to spend almost half of his life walking through the wilderness. He was not suffering the consequences of his own disobedience, but rather the lack of faith of others. Nevertheless, Caleb remained faithful, demonstrating a rare patience and devotion to God that was not shaken by his circumstances. During those 40 years, Caleb did not wait passively. He continued to serve faithfully among the people of Israel. In a time when many might have become bitter or cynical, Caleb remained an example of faith and perseverance. He knew that God's timing is perfect and that God's promises never fail. This unwavering trust is a powerful lesson for all of us who often struggle with waiting. Waiting on God is not always easy. We live in a world that values quick results and immediate solutions, but Caleb's story teaches us that the waiting period can be a time of spiritual growth and faith building. During the years in the wilderness, Caleb had the opportunity to witness God's faithfulness in practical and miraculous ways. He saw God provide manna, water from the rock, and protection from enemies. These events undoubtedly strengthened his confidence that God's promise would be fulfilled in due time. When the 40 years finally ended and the Israelites approached the promised land once again, Caleb was just as firm in his faith as before. He was 85 years old, but still possessed the same vigor and enthusiasm as when he was younger. In Joshua chapter 14, verses 10 and 11, Caleb declared, "The Lord has kept me alive," as he said. It has been 45 years since the Lord spoke this word to Moses, and today I am as strong as I was on the day Moses sent me. Caleb's statement is not only a testament to his physical health, but also to his spiritual strength. He kept his heart aligned with God and his faith intact. even while waiting decades for the promise to be fulfilled. This perseverance is a powerful example of how trusting in God can sustain us, even through long periods of uncertainty. Beyond his patience and faith, Caleb also demonstrated an active willingness to fight for God's promises. When the time finally came to claim his inheritance in the promised land, he did not hesitate. In Joshua chapter 14, verse 12, he said, "Now give me this mountain that the Lord spoke about on that day." Hebron, the area Caleb claimed, was inhabited by the descendants of Anak, known as giants. Even in his advanced age, Caleb was willing to face these enemies because he trusted that God would be with him. This willingness to act teaches us that perseverance is not passive. Trusting in God does not mean simply waiting. It means being ready to act when the right moment arrives. Caleb not only believed in God's promise, but he was also prepared to fight for it. This attitude challenges us to reflect on whether we are ready to act with courage and determination when God calls us to move forward. Another remarkable aspect of Caleb's perseverance is its impact on future generations. His faith and faithfulness not only secured his own inheritance, but also served as an example for his family and tribe. He led with integrity and trust in God, influencing those around him to follow the same path. Caleb also reminds us that waiting for God's promise is not a time of inactivity. During the years in the wilderness, he remained committed to God, serving faithfully and keeping his vision focused on the future. This ongoing dedication is a testament that perseverance is not just about the final destination, but about how we live during the journey. Caleb's qualities: faith, courage, and obedience. Caleb is remembered not only for his actions as one of the 12 spies, but also for his extraordinary character. His qualities of faith, courage, and obedience stood out in a generation that often struggled to trust God. These traits not only shaped his life, but also left a legacy that continues to inspire believers today. The first outstanding quality of Caleb is his unshakable faith. He firmly believed in God's promises, even when everyone around him succumbed to fear. While the other spies saw giants and fortified cities as insurmountable obstacles, Caleb viewed God's faithfulness as sufficient to overcome any challenge. His declaration in Numbers chapter 13, verse 30, is a powerful example of this faith. "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." This confidence did not stem from his own strength or ability, but from his conviction that God always fulfills his promises. This faith became even more evident when Caleb faced opposition not only from the other spies, but also from the entire assembly of Israel. Instead of yielding to pressure, he remained steadfast, insisting that the people trust God. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 9, Caleb said, "The Lord is with us, do not be afraid of them." He recognized that God's presence was the true source of strength and victory. This attitude challenges us to consider how we respond when faced with difficult situations. Do we rely on our own abilities, or do we seek the strength that comes from God? In addition to his faith, Caleb demonstrated extraordinary courage. It was not just the courage to confront the giants in the promised land, but also the courage to stand against the majority. The opposition he faced came not only from his enemies, but also from his own people. Despite being in the minority, Caleb remained steadfast in his conviction that God was greater than any challenge. This courage was neither impulsive nor irrational. It was grounded in his unshakable faith. This courage also manifested later in his life when he asked Joshua to give him the territory of Hebron. In Joshua chapter 14, verse 12, Caleb said, "Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day." Even at 85 years old, Caleb was ready to fight for God's plans and promises. This determination teaches us that courage rooted in faith does not diminish with age or circumstances. Caleb's obedience is another central quality of his character. In Numbers chapter 14, verse 24, God describes Caleb as someone who follows him wholeheartedly. This obedience was complete, not partial. Caleb did not follow God only when it was convenient or easy. He remained faithful even when it meant wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. His faithfulness highlights that obedience to God is not measured by external circumstances, but by continuous and consistent dedication. Caleb's obedience was also practical. He not only believed in God's promises, but acted on them. He was willing to take risks, face challenges, and fight battles to fulfill God's plan. This active obedience reminds us that true faith is not just about believing, but also about acting in alignment with that belief. These three qualities, faith, courage, and obedience, form the core of Caleb's legacy. Together, they create the image of a man who lived entirely devoted to God, even in the face of adversity. His life challenges us to examine our own attitudes. Are we living with the same trust and dedication to God that Caleb demonstrated? Furthermore, Caleb's story shows us that these qualities do not arise out of nowhere. They are the result of a deep and continuous relationship with God. Caleb not only knew God's promises, but he also trusted them and lived according to them. He demonstrated that faith is strengthened through obedience and that courage grows when we place our trust in God. Caleb's perseverance also deserves special attention. While most of his generation perished in the wilderness, he remained steadfast in his trust that God would fulfill his promises. He waited 40 years to see the promised land and still retained the same faith and determination he had shown as a young spy. This perseverance reminds us that trusting in God does not always lead to immediate results, but guarantees that his promises will be fulfilled at the right time. Caleb also serves as an example of how individual faith can impact the community. His courage and obedience inspired others, especially Joshua, who shared his vision and commitment to God. Together, they led the people of Israel toward God's promises, showing that the faithfulness of one person can positively influence others. Caleb's inheritance, claiming the mountain. Caleb's life reached a defining moment when the Israelites finally entered the Promised Land after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. For decades, Caleb had held on to the promise God made to him through Moses, that he and his descendants would inherit the land he had explored. This chapter of his story demonstrates not only the fulfillment of God's promises, but also Caleb's unwavering faith and determination to claim what was rightfully his. The moment Caleb stepped into the Promised Land, his mission was clear. He was not just a participant in the conquest, he was a man with a personal promise from God. In Joshua chapter 14, verses 6 through 12, Caleb approaches Joshua, reminding him of the promise God had made many years earlier. Caleb said, "You know what the Lord said to Moses about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses sent me to explore the land, and I brought back a report according to my convictions. He then declared, 'Now give me this mountain that the Lord promised me that day.'" The mountain Caleb referred to was Hebron, a region known for its fertile lands and strategic location. However, it was also inhabited by the descendants of Anak, giants who were considered formidable enemies. Despite being 85 years old, Caleb displayed the same vigor and confidence he had when he first spied the land. His words were not just a request, but a declaration of faith. "I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me out. I am just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then." Caleb's request highlights a key aspect of his character. He was not seeking an easy reward. He chose a challenging inheritance, knowing that Hebron was a stronghold occupied by powerful foes. This choice reveals his belief that God's promises are worth fighting for, no matter how daunting the task. Caleb's faith was active. He trusted God to help him conquer the land, but he was also willing to do his part. The conquest of Hebron was not merely a personal victory for Caleb, but a fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel. In Joshua chapter 14, verse 13, Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. The text emphasizes that Hebron became Caleb's because he wholeheartedly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. This statement underscores the connection between obedience and blessing. Caleb's unwavering trust and faithfulness to God positioned him to receive the inheritance promised to him. Hebron held deep historical and spiritual significance. It was the burial site of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of Israel. By claiming this land, Caleb was not only securing a future for his descendants, but also preserving a sacred legacy. His inheritance symbolized the fulfillment of God's promises to the patriarchs and served as a testament to God's faithfulness across generations. Caleb's conquest of Hebron also set an example for the rest of the Israelites. His courage and determination inspired others to step forward and claim their own inheritances in the Promised Land. His actions demonstrated that faith and obedience to God could overcome even the most formidable obstacles. One of the most striking aspects of Caleb's story is his ability to balance humility with confidence. While he boldly claimed God's promise, he remained fully reliant on God's strength rather than his own. This balance is evident in his declaration, "If the Lord is with me, I will drive them out," just as he said. Caleb's humility did not diminish his resolve. Rather, it strengthened his trust that God would enable him to succeed. The story of Caleb claiming Hebron also carries a powerful lesson about persistence and long-term vision. For 45 years, Caleb had waited for this moment, holding on to God's promise, despite the passage of time and the challenges he faced. His ability to remain focused on the future, even while enduring the wilderness, is a testament to his unwavering faith. Caleb's story challenges us to reflect on how we respond to God's promises. Do we have the patience to wait for God's timing? Are we willing to step out in faith and claim what he has promised, even when obstacles seem insurmountable? Caleb's example encourages us to trust that God's promises are not only reliable, but also worth pursuing with courage and determination. In claiming Hebron, Caleb not only secured a home for his family, but also left a legacy of faith, courage, and obedience that continues to inspire believers. His life reminds us that the fulfillment of God's promises often requires both faith and action. Caleb trusted in God's faithfulness, but also demonstrated his commitment through his willingness to fight for what God had promised him. The story of Caleb and Hebron is a powerful illustration of how God rewards those who remain faithful. It shows that even after long periods of waiting, God's promises are always fulfilled at the right time. Caleb's life stands as a testament to the truth that faith, courage, and perseverance are essential for those who seek to inherit God's blessings. Caleb in the Bible: connections, curiosities, and lessons. Caleb is often remembered as a hero of faith, but there are intriguing details and biblical connections that deepen our understanding of his significance. These aspects not only enrich his story, but also highlight how he fits into God's larger plan for Israel and the world. One fascinating fact about Caleb is his lineage. While he is often identified as a member of the tribe of Judah, many scholars suggest that he may not have been born an Israelite. In Numbers chapter 32, verse 12, he is referred to as Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite. The Kenizzites were a Canaanite group mentioned in Genesis chapter 15, verse 19, as one of the peoples inhabiting the land before Israel. This suggests that Caleb's family may have joined the Israelites during the Exodus or even earlier, in the time of Abraham. This possible Gentile origin emphasizes God's inclusive plan, showing that faith, not just lineage, defines God's people. Another fascinating detail is that Hebron, the land Caleb claimed, holds profound historical and spiritual significance. Long before Caleb, Hebron was the place where Abraham built an altar to the Lord. Genesis chapter 13, verse 18. It was also the burial site of Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah in the cave of Machpelah. Genesis chapter 23. By claiming Hebron, Caleb was not merely securing fertile land, he was claiming sacred ground, steeped in promises and stories of faith. This demonstrates how his choice was deeply aligned with Israel's spiritual heritage. Moreover, Hebron was a strategically important city. Located in a mountainous region, it provided natural protection against invaders. Later, during King David's reign, Hebron became Israel's first capital before Jerusalem, 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. This connects Caleb's conquest to significant future events in Israel's history, showing how his faith and obedience paved the way for greater achievements in God's plan. Caleb's story is also intertwined with that of Joshua. Both were the only members of the Exodus generation who remained faithful and were allowed to enter the Promised Land. The partnership between Caleb and Joshua exemplifies how shared faith strengthens leadership and unites people during challenging times. While Joshua led the nation, Caleb played a vital role, showing that each person has a unique calling within God's plan. There is also a fascinating connection between Caleb and the biblical concept of perseverance. His story echoes the teaching in James chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because, having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. Caleb endured 40 years of waiting in the wilderness, witnessed his peers perish due to their lack of faith, and yet remained steadfast. He exemplifies the kind of perseverance James describes, showing that faithfulness is rewarded even after a long wait. Additionally, Caleb's actions had a lasting impact on the tribe of Judah. As a respected leader, his courage and faith helped shape the identity of this tribe, which later produced King David and ultimately the Messiah, Jesus Christ. This direct connection between Caleb and the tribe of Judah highlights how his life and choices were instrumental in God's redemptive story. Another notable aspect is Caleb's refusal to let age or circumstances limit his vision. At 85 years old, he was still ready to face giants and conquer the promised territory. This determination reflects a mindset of active faith, challenging us to never stop pursuing God's promises, regardless of our stage in life or the obstacles we face. Caleb is not just a figure of faith. He's a bridge between the past and the future, a living example of how God uses individuals from diverse backgrounds and complex stories to fulfill his eternal purposes. His life teaches us that trust, obedience, and perseverance can transform not only our lives, but also the world around us. Caleb and the spies, confronting the giants of Canaan. The mission of the 12 spies was a pivotal moment in the Israelites' journey to the Promised Land, and it is within this context that Caleb's courage shines. This story is not just about scouting a distant land, but about a spiritual and emotional battle against fear, doubt, and the sense of impossibility. This chapter delves into the saga of the spies and introduces us to the giants of Canaan, who they were, their strength, and why they posed such a significant challenge. The order to send the spies came from God, as recorded in Numbers chapter 13. The 12 leaders, including Caleb and Joshua, were tasked with exploring the land of Canaan and bringing back information about its inhabitants, cities, and resources. This mission was essential to prepare Israel for conquest, but it also served as a test of faith. After 40 days of exploration, the spies returned with a divided report. 10 of them described Canaan as a land inhabited by extremely powerful people with large fortified cities. They also reported the presence of the Anakites, a people known for their gigantic stature. These details threw the nation into despair, with the Israelites lamenting that it would be impossible to conquer the land. In contrast, Caleb and Joshua gave an optimistic report. They acknowledged the challenges, but insisted that victory was guaranteed with God's help. This division in perspectives highlights the difference between seeing circumstances through the lens of fear and viewing them through the eyes of faith. Who were the giants of Canaan? The giants mentioned by the spies were the descendants of Anak, known as the Anakites. The Bible describes the Anakites as being of great stature and strength, which made them an intimidating force. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 2, they are described as a people great and tall, of whom it is said, "Who can stand against the descendants of Anak?" Some sources suggest that these peoples descended from the Nephilim mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, adding a mystical and supernatural dimension to their reputation. Beyond their physical strength, the Anakites were known for occupying strategically important fortified cities, such as Hebron. These cities were not only well defended, but also symbolized power and prosperity. The presence of giants in these regions represented not only a military challenge, but also a psychological obstacle for the Israelites, who saw themselves as inferior in comparison. In addition to the Anakites, the spies reported the presence of other powerful groups in Canaan, including the Canaanites, Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites. These groups were well established, with advanced political, economic, and military systems. Canaan was known for its independent city-states, each ruled by local kings, making the region a mosaic of strongholds and strategic alliances. Canaan's economic prosperity was evident in the fruits brought back by the spies. A single cluster of grapes so large that it had to be carried on a pole between two men, along with pomegranates and figs. These items highlighted the agricultural wealth of the land, but also served as a reminder of what was at stake. For the Israelites, Canaan was the fulfillment of God's promise, a land flowing with milk and honey. In the face of terrifying reports, the Israelites reacted with despair. They refused to advance and even suggested returning to Egypt. Amid this widespread panic, Caleb stood up and declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Numbers chapter 13, verse 30. His confidence did not come from ignoring the challenges, but from his unshakable belief in God's power to fulfill his promises. This declaration was an act of courage, not just against the giants, but against the opinion of the majority. Caleb knew that the same people he sought to encourage might turn against him, and that is exactly what happened. The people responded with hostility, even threatening to stone him. Yet Caleb remained steadfast, knowing that obedience to God was more important than seeking the approval of others. The story of Caleb and the spies offers profound lessons. The giants of Canaan symbolize the obstacles we face in our own lives, challenges that seem too great to overcome. Caleb's courage reminds us that our strength does not come from ourselves, but from God. He calls us to trust in his promises and act in faith, even when the path ahead seems impossible. Furthermore, the story teaches us the power of perspective. The 10 spies viewed Canaan through the lens of fear, seeing only the obstacles. Caleb, on the other hand, saw the opportunities and trusted that God would make a way. This difference in vision determined not only Caleb's future, but that of an entire generation. Caleb and his context, origins, conquests, and spiritual significance. This chapter delves into lesser-known aspects of his journey, exploring his possible Gentile origins, the strategic and spiritual importance of Hebron, and his role as a leader in times of crisis. These elements provide a deeper understanding of who Caleb was and the broader impact of his actions within God's plan for Israel. One intriguing detail about Caleb is his lineage. In Numbers chapter 32, verse 12, he is identified as Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite. The Kenizzites were a people mentioned in Genesis chapter 15, verse 19, as original inhabitants of Canaan. This information suggests that Caleb, or at least his family, may not have been born Israelite, but joined God's people either before or during the Exodus. Caleb's inclusion in the tribe of Judah is significant. It symbolizes the inclusive nature of God's plan, which is not limited to specific lineages, but is based on faith and obedience. This inclusion foreshadows the message of the New Testament, where faith in God becomes the defining criterion for being part of his people. Caleb, therefore, represents the unification of diverse peoples under God's purpose. The land Caleb claimed, Hebron, was not just a fertile region or a strategic fortress. It was a place rich in spiritual and historical significance. Hebron was where Abraham built an altar to the Lord, marking his devotion and covenant with God. Genesis chapter 13, verse 18. Additionally, the cave of Machpelah, located in Hebron, was the burial site of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. Genesis chapter 23. By taking possession of Hebron, Caleb was not merely securing a territory, he was reaffirming Israel's connection to the promises made to the patriarchs. Furthermore, Hebron held strategic importance. Situated in a mountainous region, it served as a natural fortress against invaders. Later, Hebron would become King David's first capital before Jerusalem, 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1, linking Caleb's conquest to key events in Israel's history. Caleb and the giants of Hebron. The challenge Caleb faced in conquering Hebron was real and intimidating. The land was inhabited by the Anakites, a people known for their gigantic stature and military strength. The Anakites were not just skilled warriors, they symbolized the fear and doubt that had paralyzed the Israelites 40 years earlier. To many, they represented the greatest obstacle to the conquest of Canaan. Caleb, however, saw the Anakites from a different perspective. For him, their size and strength were irrelevant compared to God's power. His willingness to confront these giants, even at 85 years old, reflects not only his faith, but also his understanding that victory comes from the Lord. This conquest was a practical demonstration of God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. Caleb was not just a warrior, he also played a crucial role as a leader in times of crisis. During the mission of the 12 spies, one of his declarations inspired courage amidst widespread panic. He challenged the fearful narrative and encouraged the people to trust in God, stating, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Numbers chapter 13, verse 30. Decades later, he continued to lead by example. When the time came to claim his inheritance, he did not hesitate. Leading the charge against the Anakites in Hebron, Caleb demonstrated that true leadership requires both words and actions. His willingness to fight personally for what God had promised inspired others to do the same. Caleb's life also teaches us about the role of individuals in God's larger plan. His inclusion in the tribe of Judah and his conquest of Hebron paved the way for future events, such as the establishment of David's kingdom and ultimately the coming of the Messiah. Every decision Caleb made, from his faithfulness as a spy to his determination as a conqueror, was aligned with God's purposes. Moreover, his story reinforces the idea that God uses people from diverse backgrounds and experiences to fulfill his plans. Caleb was not a typical Israelite. He came from a different lineage, yet he was chosen by God to play a central role in Israel's history. This reminds us that God's purpose transcends cultural, ethnic, and social boundaries. Caleb's revisited story challenges us to consider our own role in God's plan. Are we willing to fight for the Hebrons that God has promised us? Do we have the courage to confront the giants that arise in our lives? Caleb teaches us that faithfulness to God is not about waiting passively. It is about acting with confidence, knowing that He is faithful. Caleb's enduring legacy, impact, and historical connections. By conquering Hebron, Caleb did not simply secure a portion of land for himself and his descendants. He solidified Hebron's role as a center of influence in Israel. Historically, Hebron was far more than fertile land or a military fortress. After Caleb's conquest, it became a symbol of faithfulness to God and later played a strategic role in the establishment of King David's reign. When David was anointed king of Judah, he chose Hebron as his capital, underscoring the city's importance not only as a fortress, but also as a center of governance and spirituality. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. David's selection of Hebron as his first capital directly ties to Caleb's conquest, showing how Caleb's act of faith had long-reaching political and spiritual implications. Caleb's conquest also served as motivation for the other tribes of Israel. At a time when conquering the Promised Land seemed daunting and uncertain, Caleb's example of driving out the Anakites encouraged other tribes to step forward and claim their inheritances. His victory demonstrated that the challenges faced by God's people, even those symbolized by the giants of Canaan, could be overcome through trust in him. This ripple effect was crucial for the fulfillment of God's promises to the people of Israel. Caleb's courage proved that God was faithful and that his promises were attainable even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. In this way, Caleb became an informal leader whose determination inspired practical action among the Israelites. Caleb's role in shaping the tribe of Judah. Caleb had a direct influence on the identity of the tribe of Judah, one of the most significant tribes of Israel. His courage and faith set a standard that would be followed for generations. The tribe of Judah, which would later produce King David and the Messiah, was shaped by leaders like Caleb, who trusted in God even in the face of immense challenges. Additionally, his inheritance in Hebron strengthened Judah's position as a leading tribe. The land he conquered became not only an economic, but also a spiritual base for the tribe's growth. This demonstrates how a single life of faithfulness can shape the destiny of an entire community. Caleb is a clear example of how leadership is not confined to titles or positions. He led by example, showing that true leadership requires courage, perseverance, and trust in God. His decision to claim Hebron, even at an advanced age, showed that long-term vision is essential to fulfilling God's purposes. His story also teaches us that the impact of a leader is not measured only by what they achieve in their lifetime, but by what they leave as a legacy for others. Caleb did not merely conquer land. He left behind a legacy of faith, courage, and obedience that influenced an entire nation. Spiritually, Caleb symbolizes God's unwavering faithfulness to his promises. His life is a testament to the lasting results of trusting in God. He reminds us that faithfulness is not just a personal attribute, but a legacy that can impact generations. Caleb's possible inclusion as a Kenizzite in the people of Israel also sends a powerful message of inclusion and unity in God's plan. He exemplifies the idea that those who trust and obey God are welcomed into his family, regardless of their origins. Caleb's legacy is a reminder that faithfulness to God can transform lives and shape the future. His courage, vision, and determination made him not just a conqueror, but a builder of change for Israel. His story challenges us to remain faithful, face challenges with confidence, and leave a lasting impact for those who follow us. Caleb's faith and the fulfillment of divine promises. Caleb's story is a practical demonstration of how trusting in God's promises can shape lives and transform generations. This chapter delves into the depth of his faith, his role as an inspiring leader, and how he helped pave the way for the fulfillment of God's plans for Israel. Caleb lived to see God's promises fulfilled, even after decades of waiting. At 85 years old, when he finally claimed Hebron, it was not just the culmination of a personal journey, but a living testimony of God's faithfulness. In Joshua chapter 14, he confidently declared, "I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. Give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day." Caleb's role extended beyond the fulfillment of his own promises. He also served as a model for the new generation of Israelites who grew up observing his faithfulness. For many born and raised in the wilderness, Caleb was a living example of what it meant to trust God in all circumstances. During the conquest of Canaan, Caleb's determination to face the giants of Hebron showed the new generation that no obstacle was too great for God. His victory inspired courage not only in his tribe, Judah, but throughout Israel, motivating them to advance in the conquest of the Promised Land. The connection with Joshua and other leaders. Although Joshua is often remembered as the primary leader of the conquest of Canaan, Caleb played a complementary role, representing the perseverance and faith needed to face seemingly impossible challenges. Their partnership exemplifies how God uses different leaders with unique strengths and characteristics to fulfill his purpose. Additionally, Caleb inspired other tribal leaders. His willingness to fight for Hebron showed that God's promises were not automatic. They required effort, obedience, and action. This message was critical in motivating other tribes to take responsibility for their own conquests. Hebron, the territory Caleb claimed, was not just a reward for his faithfulness. It was a symbol of spiritual connection and renewal. As the home of Abraham and the site of the cave of Machpelah, where the patriarchs were buried, Hebron represented the continuity of God's promises from the time of Abraham. Furthermore, Hebron played a central role in Israel's future history. Years later, it became King David's first capital, a place of governance and unity for the nation. This shows that Caleb's conquest had implications far beyond his lifetime, shaping the destiny of the tribe of Judah and of Israel as a whole. Caleb is a powerful example of leadership that combines vision and action. He did not wait for God's promises to fulfill themselves. He took concrete steps to claim them. Even at 85 years old, he demonstrated that true leadership is characterized by unwavering commitment and determination. His story also teaches that leaders of faith not only inspire those around them, but also leave a legacy for future generations. Caleb led with the understanding that his actions had eternal implications, shaping the spiritual identity of his tribe and nation, connection to God's greater purpose. Caleb's life is deeply intertwined with God's redemptive purpose for Israel. By claiming Hebron, he secured an essential territory for the tribe of Judah, which would play a central role in the lineage of the Messiah. Every step of faith Caleb took, from exploring Canaan to claiming his inheritance, was part of a larger plan that he may not have fully understood but faithfully fulfilled. Moreover, his inclusion as a Kenizzite within the tribe of Judah highlights the inclusive nature of God's plan. Caleb symbolizes that God's calling is open to all who trust and obey, regardless of their origins. Caleb teaches us several important lessons. Inspirational leadership. His story challenges us to live with purpose, act with confidence, and leave a legacy that reflects God's faithfulness.